Appreciate your joining us, Dr. Rajiv Kumar. A lot of attention is being focused on the big number that we are back to pre-pandemic levels. The latest economic survey had projected the economic growth at 8 to 8.5%, but often these targets are missed. You might remember that the last economic survey projected economic growth for 2021-22 at 11%. Now the estimated growth is 9.2%. The economy contracted by 7.3% during 2021 as against the projection of 6 to 6.5% in the economic survey. So when today the economic survey projects GDP at 8 to 8.5%, are you optimistic that we will meet this target?
It is great to be here, but let me start off by pointing out that the IMF has projected India's growth rate in FY23 at 9%. And earlier in a program, actually on India Today, I was told that these growth estimates are conservative. And other multilateral agencies are also talking about the same level. Now, I heard Subhash saying as to what these were based on. And the survey actually lays down that. It lays down that there are several factors which have improved. For example, the financial sector, now the banks are much better capitalized. Their capital adequacy ratio is much higher. Their NPAs and both gross and net are much lower. So they're ready to lend. Credit to non-food sectors has risen finally, as rising now, and having hit a bottom a couple of years ago. The consumption demand is hopefully going to improve with the showing of agriculture, and therefore there are there is some talk about improvement in rural demand as well for that. And most importantly, the government has shown its commitment to ramping up public capital expenditure, 15% growth last year, and a commitment to do same, and this is what the economic survey talks about, that growth of infrastructure through public capex will help both the demand and the supply side by removing the supply side bottlenecks. So then finally the exports. That there are more than 300 billion April to December. The global economy looks quite good still, and therefore, that tide is still fairly high, so our exports can continue to do better. These are, I think, sufficient factors to base your estimates of 8.5% growth rate, especially when others expect us to grow even higher at a faster rate.
The reason as I said, in recent years, the government has missed the targets. There was the pandemic that sort of shook the economy in a way. The economic survey, Dr. Kumar, presents the rosy picture. Exports doing well, for example, the fiscal situation is good. But the deep concerns, underlying concerns about unemployment, 84% of households have lost their incomes, or there's been a decline in incomes in the last 2 years. We still don't know how that's going to be addressed. And the big key question of how private investment and consumption in particular is going to revive to the levels of pre-pandemic India. As I said, is the survey presenting a slightly rosy picture in what is actually very difficult times, Dr. Kumar?
Well, the times are difficult, and the times are faced with laced and faced with uncertainty, which the economic survey points out that we are living in times faced with significant uncertainty. And it also talks about, there is a clear statement in the first chapter itself about the consumption weakness, that there remains a consumption weakness which has to be taken care of. Now, the consumption one part of the government that the government has done already is to take care of that by transferring, I think it's 1.8 lakh crore under Pradhan Mantri Kisan Samman Nidhi to the 11 crore farming households. That's one part of it. So that's direct transfer. On the other hand, it's also committed to ramping up, as I said earlier, the capital expenditure and build up the infrastructure and the housing sector, which will generate sustainable employment. Now, the other part could have been and people can argue that the services sector, which were the hardest hit, could be, could be given some direct transfer, some direct support, because that's also where the largest number of informal sector workers are, and they have of course suffered during the pandemic. And maybe we don't know. Let's see what the budget holds tomorrow. By the way, it's not economic survey's job to lay down policies. It's the budget's job. And the economic survey lays the background for that by providing us all the analytics and the trends and the background for that. And this, I think, all the people on your panel that I see are so well versed in this that they would know this, that the economic survey is a document of record, and is a document which provides the backdrop for the budget to then announce policy initiatives on.
Let me just quote, if you would, what former Finance Minister P. Chidambaram has just said. He says the economic survey repeats ad nauseum that at the end of 21-22, the economy would have recovered to pre-pandemic levels. It means in plain language that on 31/3/2022, the GDP will be back at the same level as it was on 31/3/2020. It means that it has taken 2 years to go back to where we were. How do you respond? That's the glass half empty view, that we are virtually still where we were 2 years ago, and we are celebrating that.
I would have expected Mr. Chidambaram, knowing how an astute finance person he is, to make a much more reasonable comment on that. Of course, we know that the 2 years we have lost the growth, but the fact is that we are still, and as I think Subhash Garg pointed out, will be thankfully 2% higher than what we were at the end of March 20, the fiscal year 1920, and not at the same level. Of course we have. And would anybody have done differently in the pandemic years? The best of the global economies have suffered. It was an external shock of unforeseen and historical proportions. And the fact is that our recovery in the second half of 2021 has been the smartest. And we will, I don't like saying this very often, but we will remain the fastest growing large economy in the world going forward. So the fact is that Mr. Chidambaram should recognize the nature of shock that we face. And he would recollect how he responded to the shock of the 2008-2009 global financial crisis by opening up the sort of taps for extra spending, which then caused runaway inflation. This government doesn't want to do that. This government doesn't want to let inflation rip. And this government is in the business of sorting out, addressing supply side bottlenecks, improve logistics, improve productivity, improve competitiveness, so that we can get sustained employment generation as we go forward. But to say that after 2 years we're still at the same level, I think is not expected of a former finance minister.
So let me ask you in conclusion, Dr. Kumar, looking ahead to tomorrow's budget, the big challenge, what is that one big thing that you believe is the biggest challenge facing the finance minister tomorrow?
The biggest challenge, if your permission, may I mention two, is to ensure that private investment kicks off and responds and then rises to the level that it should or it can, and that's what the big challenge is, because that is this government is committed to a private sector-led growth in the economy. And the second one, of course, is employment, which is that we need to generate employment at the higher rate you can get in the sectors like construction, housing, exports of labor-intensive products, agriculture, the better off we would be, and that's what is required. So those are the two challenges that, in my view, the finance minister will address